I was CEO of my family business for a decade, but when they told me my golden bro who finished prestigious university would replace me, I resigned, took all the orders, and now the company is collapsing under his leadership while the whole family begs for my help. My name is Dylan, and I'm 34 years old. I just received the most spectacular middle finger from the one person who was supposed to have my back through everything. Let me paint you a picture of how this all went down. Instead of going to college like every other 18-year-old back in 2005, I made what I thought was a smart decision to work at my father's motorcycle shop. It wasn't much to look at. Just 3 service bays tucked into a decent location in a shopping center, right next to a pizza place that always smelled like pepperoni. The aroma became so familiar that I could practically taste it every time I walked into work. My dad, Victor, had always talked about passing the business down to me someday. Those were his exact words, repeated countless times over the years. Dylan, this will be yours. You're learning the family trade. For 12 long years, I believed that promise with every fiber of my being. I started as the oil change kid, which is basically automotive hell if you've never experienced it. Picture yourself crawling under motorcycles that haven't seen a proper wash since Clinton was president, getting brake fluid in your eyes because some jackass customer never bothered to mention there was a leak, and learning to diagnose engine problems by sound alone. While my brother Brandon was off at some expensive college, learning how to make PowerPoint presentations and talk in corporate buzzwords, I was down in the trenches, getting my hands dirty and actually learning the trade. By year 5, I wasn't just the oil change guy anymore. Customers started asking for me specifically when they called. Is Dylan working today? He's the only one who figured out why my Harley was making that clicking noise, they'd say. That kind of trust takes years to build in this business, especially because bike repairs are expensive, and most people assume you're trying to scam them from the moment they walk through the door. Victor started leaning on me more and more as the years went by. His lunch breaks mysteriously turned into 3-hour disappearing acts. Checking on parts orders became code for hanging out at the barber shop, telling the same stories about the good old days to anyone who would listen. Every responsibility he dropped landed squarely on my desk, and I caught them all because I genuinely thought I was building something for my future. I handled the difficult customers. You know, the ones who think all mechanics are crooks and demand to see every old part you replace. I worked every single weekend without complaint. I stayed late for emergency repairs when someone's bike broke down on a Friday night. I covered for Victor when he decided Wednesday was golf day, which happened more often than I care to remember. The shop wasn't just my job anymore. It had become my entire identity. Then Brandon graduated college and started hanging around the shop more often. Fresh out of business school with his fancy degree, he would walk around talking about optimizing workflows and customer acquisition strategies like he had just discovered fire. He threw around terms like synergy and market penetration while I was actually under the hood fixing real problems for real customers. At first, I figured he was just being Brandon, the annoying little brother who thought his college education had magically transformed him into Steve Jobs. I'd roll my eyes when he started explaining basic business concepts that I'd been applying for years without needing fancy terminology. I assumed this phase would pass once he found a real job somewhere else and stopped treating our family business like his personal laboratory for half-baked theories. I was completely wrong about that assumption. Here's the moment everything went absolutely nuclear. One afternoon, Victor called me into his office after we'd closed up for the day. It was the same cramped office with the calendar from 2021 still hanging crooked on the wall and coffee stains covering every available surface. I walked in thinking this was finally it. The retirement announcement I'd been waiting for. The official handover ceremony. The moment I'd been working toward for 12 solid years. But Victor has never been the type to ease into bad news. He doesn't believe in cushioning the blow or preparing you for disappointment. He just dropped his bombshell like a freaking anvil falling from the sky. I'm making Brandon the new shop manager, he announced without any preamble. He'll be taking over operations starting Tuesday. I actually laughed out loud. It had to be some kind of joke, right? Brandon, the guy who calls a torque wrench a bike tightener and once asked me with complete seriousness if brake pads go on the wheels. Brandon, who couldn't change a tire if his life literally depended on it. Brandon has the education for this, Dylan, Victor continued, as if he was explaining something obvious that I was too stupid to understand. Modern business practices are important. The motorcycle industry is changing, and we need someone who understands marketing, customer relations, and financial planning. This motherfucker was sitting there talking to me about customer relations like I hadn't been the face of this business for 12 years. like I hadn't personally built every meaningful relationship we had with contractors, local businesses, and repeat customers. Like I hadn't spent over a decade earning the trust and respect of people who now asked for me by name. "What about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and professional despite the rage building in my chest. "You'll be his assistant," Victor replied matter-of-factly. "You'll teach him the technical side while he handles the business side of things." Assistant to my little brother. After 12 years of running this place while Victor played golf and told war stories to his drinking buddies. After building the reputation that kept customers coming back. After sacrificing my 20s and early 30s to this business. That's when I felt something click inside my head, like a switch being flipped. I looked him dead in the eyes and said the calmest, coldest words of my life. "Congratulations on your new manager, Victor. I quit." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor just stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, as if the possibility of me walking away had never even crossed his mind. "You can't just quit, Dylan," he finally sputtered. "This is a family business. You have responsibilities here." "Had responsibilities," I corrected him. "Past tense." "You're being ridiculous," Victor said, his voice rising with desperation. "Brandon needs your help too. You can't just abandon everything we've built together." "Brandon can figure it out with his fancy degree," I replied, standing up from my chair. "Shouldn't be too hard for someone with all that modern business education." Victor's face was turning red now, and I could see the panic starting to set in as he realized I was serious. "You walk out that door, you're walking away from everything. No reference, no severance, no nothing." He leaned forward in his chair, trying to use his intimidation tactics that had worked on me when I was 18, but meant absolutely nothing to me now. "You think you can just abandon your family like this?" "I'm not abandoning anyone, Victor," I said, my voice still perfectly calm. "You already abandoned me for someone with a piece of paper." That's when Brandon, who had apparently been lurking in the doorway like a scared little kid, finally found his voice and decided to contribute to this disaster. "Maybe this is for the best, Dylan," he said with that condescending tone he'd perfected in college. "You never really understood the business side anyway." I turned to look at him, my little brother, who couldn't change a tire if his life depended on it, who had spent the last 4 years learning theory while I was dealing with reality. Here he was, telling me I didn't understand the business I'd been running for 12 years while Victor played golf and collected checks. "Good luck with that, hermano," I said with a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "You're going to need it." Then I walked out. Just like that. I walked straight to my truck and drove directly to Murphy's bar to find my best friend Tyler, because I had some serious planning to do, and I needed someone with a clear head to help me think this through. Behind me, I could hear Brandon already talking excitedly about his vision for growth and expansion, with Victor agreeing enthusiastically with everything he said. Perfect. Let them celebrate their brilliant decision while they still could. Tyler has been my best friend since high school, and he's also got zero patience for family drama and the sharp mind of someone who survived 3 messy divorces without going broke. When I walked into Murphy's that evening, he took one look at my face and knew something major had gone down. "Your dad did what now?" Tyler nearly choked on his Corona when I finished explaining the entire situation to him. "Put Brandon in charge after 12 years, I repeated. "Your brother Brandon, the guy who asked me last month if you're supposed to check oil when the engine is hot or cold." "Yep, that's the one." Tyler just shook his head slowly and signaled the bartender for 2 more drinks. The look on his face was a mixture of disbelief and barely contained amusement. "Well, screw them then," he said finally. "What's the plan?" I took a long drink and felt the first genuine smile I'd had in hours spreading across my face. "I'm going to destroy them." "Good," Tyler replied without hesitation. "How?" And that's when I started smiling for the first time since this whole nightmare began. The anger was still there, burning hot in my chest, but now it had direction and purpose. The next morning, I woke up with a moderate hangover and a crystal-clear mission. While Victor and Brandon were probably celebrating their brilliant decision over coffee and donuts, discussing all the amazing changes they were going to implement, I was about to start the most important sales campaign of my life. But first, I needed to talk to the one person in my family who had always told me the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. I needed to see my Uncle Vincent. Vincent is Victor's older brother, and they've had what you might diplomatically call a complicated relationship since forever. According to Victor's version of events, Vincent had made bad choices throughout his life and consistently embarrassed the family name. But when you translated Victor's complaints from his typical controlling bullshit into plain English, what it really meant was that Vincent refused to kiss Victor's ass and live by his rigid rules about how family members should behave. Vincent owns a small trucking company and drives a Harley that's probably older than Brandon. More importantly, he's also the only person who has ever called Victor out on his control freak tendencies and lived to tell about it. I found him at his warehouse that morning, elbow deep in the engine of a Freightliner that looked older than me and twice as reliable as anything Brandon would ever touch. "Dylan, what brings you by?" Vincent asked, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "Your father finally died." "Not yet," I replied, "but his business is about to." Vincent straightened up and gave me that look he gets when he smells family drama brewing. The expression of someone who's about to enjoy whatever story is coming next. "Do tell," he said with obvious anticipation. I explained the whole situation from beginning to end. The 12 years of promises, Brandon's sudden promotion despite having zero experience, Victor's justifications about modern business practices, and my decision to walk away from everything I'd built. Vincent listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression getting progressively darker with each detail I shared. "That sounds exactly like something your father would do," he said finally, his voice dripping with disgust. "Remember when he tried to tell me how to run my trucking business? Called me irresponsible for not expanding fast enough, said I didn't understand growth strategies." "What did you do?" I asked. "Told him to mind his own damn business," Vincent replied with satisfaction. "We barely speak anymore, which honestly works out fine for both of us." He cracked open a beer despite it being barely 10 in the morning, offering me one which I declined since I still had work to do. "So what's your plan, nephew?" "I'm opening my own shop," I said, the words feeling more real now that I was saying them out loud to someone else. "You need money?" "I've got savings, but I need space and I need it fast if I'm going to make this work." Vincent's face broke into a grin that reminded me of Christmas morning when I was a kid. "Well, it just so happens I know a guy who owns a perfect building about 3 miles from your father's place." He took another swig of his beer and continued. "Big enough for 4 bays, good parking, reasonable rent, and the location gets decent traffic. And this guy might be willing to co-sign a lease for his favorite nephew," he added with a wink. "You do that?" I asked, genuinely surprised by how quickly this was falling into place. "Kid, I've been waiting 12 years for someone to knock your father down a peg," Vincent replied. "This is going to be even better than I imagined." That afternoon, I met Tyler at the building Vincent had found, and it exceeded every expectation I'd had. The place was absolutely perfect. Bigger than Victor's shop, with a better location on a main street instead of being hidden away in a shopping center. The previous tenant had left behind some useful equipment, and the rent was more than reasonable for what we were getting. Tyler asked, when I started talking enthusiastically about lease terms and renovation possibilities. "You in or what?" I responded. "Shit, yeah, I'm in," Tyler said without hesitation. "I hate my job anyway." Tyler isn't a mechanic, but he's incredibly good with people and understands money better than most accountants I've met. Plus, he's got that rare ability to tell customers the truth about what's wrong with their vehicle without making them feel stupid or taken advantage of. That evening, I started making the calls that would change everything. I had a list of the best people from Victor's shop, and I knew exactly who I wanted on my team. My first call was to Leo, our best mechanic at Victor's shop. He'd been there for 8 years and knew every regular customer by name. More importantly, he did work that other shops charged twice as much for, and customers trusted him completely. When his phone rang, I got straight to the point. "Leo, it's Dylan. I'm not retiring and I'm not disappearing. I'm opening my own place, and I want you to come with me." "When?" he asked without any hesitation. 2 weeks, I replied. "I'm in," Leo said immediately. "Brandon doesn't know shit about bikes, and I'm not sticking around to watch him destroy everything we've built." My second call was to Sam, our parts guy who somehow always knew exactly what we needed and where to get it cheap. Sam had connections with suppliers that took years to develop, and he could source anything from vintage Harley parts to modern Japanese bike components. "Brandon running the shop, dude," Sam said when I explained my plan. "I give it 6 months before that place burns down completely." "You want to help me build something better?" I asked. "When do we start?" My third call was to Maya, our front desk manager who had been the friendly face customers saw when they walked in, and the organized brain that kept our appointment system running smoothly. "Oh, thank God," she said when I explained what I was doing. I was already updating my resume and posting it on job sites. "Brandon tried to explain his customer engagement protocols to me yesterday," Maya continued, "and I wanted to throw my stapler at his head." By the end of that week, I'd secured the building with Vincent's help, assembled my core team of experienced professionals, and started setting up supplier relationships. The best part was that Victor's suppliers were absolutely thrilled to work with me directly. I wasn't just another account number to them. I was the guy who'd been placing orders and solving problems for years. They knew my voice, they trusted my judgment, and they were eager to continue our business relationship. But the real cherry on top came from a completely unexpected source. Vincent called me Friday night with news that made my week. "You're not going to believe this," Vincent said, barely able to contain his excitement. "But I just got off the phone with Martinez." Martinez owned the biggest landscaping company in town. They'd been Victor's largest customer for the past 10 years, probably accounting for 30% of our total revenue. Their fleet of trucks and equipment kept our service bays busy year-round. "What did Martinez want?" I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew where this was heading. "He heard you quit," Vincent explained. "Asked if I knew where you were going because he'd been thinking about switching shops anyway. Said your father has been getting lazy lately, and Brandon doesn't know anything about commercial vehicles. I told him you were opening your own place," Vincent continued. "He wants to meet next week to discuss bringing his whole fleet over to you." That night, I sat in my empty apartment with a drink and actually smiled for the first time since this whole mess started. It wasn't because I was happy. I was still pissed as hell about everything that had happened. But I could see the path forward clearly now, and it was going to be absolutely devastating for Victor and Brandon. Victor thought he was setting Brandon up for success by handing him a functioning business with established customers and reliable employees. What he actually did was hand me everything I needed to completely destroy them both. And I was going to enjoy every single minute of watching it happen. 6 weeks later, I found myself standing in my own shop, watching my team work efficiently on 8 different vehicles, while customers waited comfortably in our lobby that actually had decent coffee and working Wi-Fi. But let me back up and tell you about the absolute shit show that Brandon created during his first month as manager. The idiot tried to implement some business school bullshit he'd learned about lean operations and cost optimization. In Brandon's mind, this meant making dramatic changes to prove he was bringing value to the business. In reality, this meant he fired Leo's part-time assistant to save money, started buying cheaper parts from suppliers that nobody in the industry trusted, and tried to rush every job to increase what he called productivity metrics. The result was a complete disaster that unfolded exactly as anyone with actual experience could have predicted. Tyler, who had been keeping tabs on Victor's shop through his extensive network of gossiping drinking buddies, gave me regular updates that were equal parts hilarious and infuriating to hear. Brandon told Mrs. Vasquez that her transmission flush would take 2 hours because he wanted to exceed customer expectations and build brand loyalty. What actually happened was that it took Leo 4 hours to complete the job because the cheap fluid Brandon had ordered was the wrong viscosity for her specific vehicle. Mrs. Vasquez waited all day, missed a full day of work, and left a scathing 1-star review online. When some contractor brought in a work truck with brake problems, Brandon quoted him for new brake pads without bothering to check the rotors first. When Leo discovered that the rotors were warped too and needed replacement, Brandon told the customer it was a completely separate issue and tried to charge him double the original estimate. The guy walked out immediately and took his business elsewhere. 3 different customers filed complaints with the State Business Bureau during Brandon's first month alone. His response was to blame Leo for not properly communicating the value proposition to customers and failing to upsell additional services. Meanwhile, I was building something beautiful from the ground up. The shop itself came together faster than I had dared to hope, thanks to Vincent knowing contractors who owed him favors. We got the place renovated cheaply and quickly, ending up with 4 modern service bays, professional lift equipment, a parts room that actually made logical sense, and a customer waiting area that didn't look like a prison waiting room. But the real magic was the team we assembled. Leo brought over 2 other mechanics from Victor's shop, guys who'd been there for years but were completely fed up with Brandon's amateur hour management style and his constant interference with their work. These weren't just skilled technicians. They were professionals who understood that reputation and quality work were everything in this business. Sam not only came with us, but he brought his entire network of parts suppliers who immediately gave us better prices than Victor was getting. Years of relationship building and proving reliability had earned Sam respect in the industry, and that translated directly into cost savings for our new operation. Maya transformed our front office into something genuinely professional. No more handwritten invoices on carbon paper that were impossible to read. No more customers standing around wondering what was happening with their vehicle while we scrambled to find paperwork. No more "we'll call you when it's ready" promises that we'd inevitably forget to keep. Maya implemented systems that actually worked and made customers feel valued and informed. And Tyler turned out to be an absolute natural at the business side of things. He could explain a repair estimate to a customer without making them feel stupid or taken advantage of. He could handle difficult people without losing his temper or getting defensive. And somehow, he always knew exactly what to say to calm down a frustrated customer who was having the worst day of their week. Our opening day was supposed to be quiet, just a soft launch to work out any operational kinks before we started serious advertising. Instead, word had already spread through the local contractor community like wildfire, and we had a line of work trucks waiting for us when we opened the doors at 7 a.m. Martinez showed up personally with 3 of his fleet vehicles and a huge grin on his face. "Heard this is where the real mechanics ended up," he said, shaking my hand. "Let's see what you guys can do." By the end of our first week, we'd completed more work than I'd expected for our entire first month. By the end of our first month, we were booked solid and already seriously looking at expanding our hours to meet demand. But here's the really satisfying part of this whole situation. Our success was directly proportional to Victor's failure. Every customer who came to us was a customer who wasn't going to them anymore. Every job we completed professionally was revenue they weren't generating. Every positive review we received online was a reminder that Brandon didn't have the first clue what the hell he was doing. The breaking point came about 2 months after I'd quit Victor's shop. Tyler came in on a Monday morning with the biggest shit-eating grin I'd ever seen on his face. "Dude, you are not going to believe what happened this weekend," he said, practically bouncing with excitement. Apparently, Brandon had managed to completely screw up a simple brake job on a regular customer's car. Instead of replacing the brake pads like any competent mechanic would do, he'd somehow convinced himself that he could refurbish the old ones to save money and increase profit margins. Brandon had used some YouTube tutorial and a Dremel tool, like he was fixing a toaster instead of dealing with a critical safety system. The result was catastrophic brake failure just 2 days later in a grocery store parking lot. Thankfully, nobody was injured, but it left one very pissed-off customer and the potential for a serious lawsuit hanging over Victor's shop. The customer called Leo directly to complain, Tyler reported with obvious glee. Leo told him he didn't work there anymore and gave him our number instead. "The guy's bringing his car in this afternoon," Tyler continued. "Wants to see if we can fix both his car and his faith in local mechanics." That afternoon, I got what turned out to be the most satisfying customer interaction of my entire career. Here was a guy who'd been going to Victor's shop faithfully for 12 years, explaining in detail how Brandon had nearly gotten him killed with dangerously incompetent work. He was asking if we could fix both his vehicle and restore his trust in the local automotive repair industry. Not only did we fix his car properly and safely, but he left us a 5-star Google review that specifically mentioned Brandon's dangerous incompetence and contrasted it with our actual professional service. The review was detailed, well-written, and devastating to Victor's reputation. The best part came that evening when Victor called me directly. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dylan, we need to talk," Victor said, his voice strained with stress. "I'm busy, Victor," I replied, not bothering to hide my lack of interest in whatever he wanted. "This lawsuit thing, it's serious. Brandon made a mistake, but not my problem anymore," I interrupted. "Come on, Dylan, we're family," Victor pleaded, playing the family card that he'd conveniently forgotten when it mattered. "Yeah, where was that family loyalty when you threw 12 years of my work in the trash?" I asked. I hung up before he could respond, and I've been hanging up on him every time he's called since then. Because here's the thing Victor never understood. Respect isn't something you inherit by being someone's father. It's something you earn by treating people right and honoring your commitments. Now he was watching 12 years of his own work crumble while mine flourished, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. The irony was perfect, and I wasn't about to let him guilt me into fixing the mess that Brandon had created. 4 months after opening my shop, I was living a dream I never knew I wanted. We'd expanded to 6 service bays, hired 2 more experienced mechanics, and had a waiting list for appointments that stretched out 3 weeks into the future. Our reputation was spreading so quickly that people were driving from neighboring towns just to have us work on their vehicles. The real entertainment was watching Victor's shop implode in slow motion. Brandon's incompetence wasn't just limited to that brake job fiasco, it had become a weekly occurrence. According to Tyler's intelligence network, which consisted of drinking buddies who loved drama more than football, Brandon was averaging about 1 major screw-up per week. One particularly memorable incident involved Brandon trying to replace a water pump without bothering to drain the coolant first. He flooded the entire service bay, and Leo had to explain to him why you can't just patch up a cooling system with duct tape while the customer waited 4 hours for the mess to be cleaned up properly. The following week, Brandon quoted a customer $1,300 for a completely new transmission, when all they actually needed was a simple fluid change and filter replacement. A $150 job at most. When Leo tried to correct him and explain the actual problem, Brandon got defensive and told the customer that Leo didn't understand modern profit margins and business efficiency. The customer walked out immediately and posted about the experience in the local Facebook community group, warning others about dishonest business practices. 2 more long-term customers abandoned ship when Brandon tried to upsell them on services their vehicles didn't need, using high-pressure tactics he'd probably learned in some business school seminar about maximizing revenue per customer interaction. Word was getting around town that Victor's shop wasn't trustworthy anymore, and people were actively warning their friends to stay away. The lawsuit from the brake job was still pending, dragging on through the legal system, but it had already cost them their insurance provider. No insurance company wanted to cover a shop where the manager was installing safety-critical components based on YouTube tutorials and power tools. But my favorite development came directly from Vincent, who was getting regular updates from Victor himself as the situation became increasingly desperate. "You're never going to guess who just called me asking for a loan," Vincent told me with barely contained laughter. "Victor, your dear old father needs 15 grand to keep the shop running," Vincent continued. "Brandon's managed to screw up their relationship with every major supplier in town." Here's what had happened. Brandon, in his infinite wisdom, had decided that paying bills on time was inefficient cash flow management. He'd started stretching payment terms with suppliers, thinking he could invest that money elsewhere and make a profit on the float. What he actually did was destroy 12 years of carefully built business relationships and get the shop put on cash-only terms with everyone from parts suppliers to the electric company. "What did you tell him?" I asked Vincent. "I told him I'd consider it if he fired Brandon and made you a full partner," Vincent replied with satisfaction. "And he hung up on me," Vincent added, chuckling. That same week, I got a visit from Victor himself. I was under the hood of a Silverado when Maya came back to tell me my father was in the lobby asking to speak with me. Part of me wanted to tell her to throw him out, but I was genuinely curious about what kind of desperate bullshit he was ready to spew. I found him standing in our waiting area, looking around at the clean floors, the modern equipment, and the customers who were actually smiling while they waited for their vehicles to be serviced. His expression was a complex mix of surprise and something that might have been regret, though knowing Victor, it was probably just frustration that I'd succeeded without him. "This is impressive, Dylan," he said, clearly uncomfortable but trying to sound casual. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone neutral and professional. "Look, Dylan, I think we got off on the wrong foot with this whole Brandon situation," Victor began, launching into what was obviously a prepared speech. "Wrong foot, Victor?" I interrupted. "You took 12 years of my work and handed it to someone who thinks brake fluid is a type of energy drink." "Brandon's learning," Victor protested weakly. "He just needs time to adjust to the practical side of the business." "Brandon's a fraud, Victor," I said bluntly. "He's destroying everything you built over the past 25 years. Victor's face took on that stubborn look I knew so well, the expression he got when reality contradicted his preferred version of events. "He has a degree, Dylan. He understands business principles and modern management techniques," Victor insisted. "Business principles don't mean shit if you can't do the actual work," I replied. "And modern management techniques are useless when you're managing people who know you're incompetent." We stared at each other for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to find some angle that would make this conversation go his way. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said finally, his voice taking on a slightly pleading tone. "But maybe we could work together in some capacity. Refer customers to each other, share resources, that kind of thing." I actually laughed out loud at the suggestion. "Victor, I'm booked solid for the next month. I've got customers driving from 2 hours away because word got out that we actually know what we're doing. Why the hell would I want to associate my successful business with Brandon's amateur hour operation?" I continued. "Because we're family," Victor said, playing his last card with desperation creeping into his voice. "Family doesn't abandon each other for someone with a piece of paper," I replied coldly. He left without another word, and I went back to work with a genuine smile on my face. Watching him walk away defeated felt better than I'd expected it would. That evening, Leo and I were closing up the shop when he came over with the latest gossip from his former co-workers who were still stuck at Victor's place, trying to keep things running despite Brandon's continued incompetence. They lost the Martinez contract, Leo reported with obvious satisfaction. He took all his vehicles somewhere else. Where'd they go? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He called this morning, Leo continued with a grin. Wants to set up a comprehensive maintenance schedule for his whole fleet. The Martinez fleet had been 30% of Victor's business. Now it was going to be a significant chunk of mine, and there wasn't anything Victor could do to stop it. 6 months into running my shop, and I was having the time of my life. We'd added 2 more service bays to handle the increasing volume, hired another experienced mechanic who came highly recommended, and installed a customer lounge with actual comfortable chairs and a coffee machine that didn't taste like transmission fluid mixed with despair. Meanwhile, I was getting front row seats to watch Brandon's continued descent into automotive hell. The kid had managed to alienate almost every supplier in town through his brilliant business strategies. According to Leo's sources, including his ex-girlfriend who worked at the parts store, Brandon had convinced himself that he could negotiate better deals by playing hardball with vendors who'd been working with Victor for decades. He tried to tell Ramirez Auto Parts that he could get cheaper prices by ordering online from discount suppliers. When Ramirez explained that they provided next-day delivery and comprehensive warranty support, Brandon arrogantly said he didn't need to pay premium prices for what he called unnecessary services. Now, Victor's shop was buying parts retail from chain auto stores and trying to charge customers wholesale prices. The profit margin was so thin they were barely breaking even on most jobs. But Brandon's masterstroke of stupidity came when he decided to modernize their diagnostic procedures. Instead of relying on Leo's 12 years of troubleshooting experience, Brandon bought expensive computer diagnostic equipment and decided that machines were more reliable than human expertise and intuition. The problem with Brandon's approach was that computer diagnostics only tell you what's wrong, not why it's wrong or how to fix it efficiently. They're a tool, not a replacement for actual knowledge and experience. Some guy brought in a Mercedes with an engine light, and the computer said it was an oxygen sensor malfunction. Brandon confidently ordered a $400 sensor and spent 6 hours trying to install it, following the computer's guidance. What was actually wrong? A loose gas cap. A 30-second fix that any experienced mechanic would have checked first. Did Brandon learn from this expensive mistake? Absolutely not. He blamed the computer for giving him incorrect information. The coup de grace came when Brandon tried to expand their services to include bodywork, a field he knew absolutely nothing about. He'd somehow convinced Victor that they were leaving money on the table by not offering collision repair services, and he talked him into buying spray painting equipment that they had no idea how to use properly. Their first bodywork customer was a simple paint touch-up on a Honda Civic. Brandon, with his typical overconfidence, assured the customer it would look good as new in just 2 days. Tyler was practically crying with laughter when he told me what happened next. Brandon didn't prep the surface properly, used the wrong type of paint for the job, and didn't let it cure long enough before applying the clear coat. The customer ended up posting pictures on social media, and it looked like someone had attacked the car with a paintbrush during an earthquake. The comments were absolutely brutal. People started sharing their own Brandon horror stories. Others posted jokes about abstract automotive art, and the whole thing went viral in our local community. Victor had to refund the customer's money completely and pay for proper bodywork at another shop. Total cost, $400-500 for a job that should have been $350. But here's where the story gets really good. That same customer came to us the following week with his mangled Honda Civic. "I heard you guys actually know what you're doing," he said, gesturing at the disaster Brandon had created. "Can you fix what that idiot did to my car?" Not only did we fix Brandon's catastrophic paintwork, but we did it for half what Brandon had originally quoted the customer. We properly prepped the surface, used the correct paint and techniques, and delivered a finish that actually looked professional. The customer was so impressed with our work and professionalism that he brought his wife's car in the next week for routine maintenance. Then he referred 3 of his coworkers to us. This became a consistent pattern that I found absolutely hilarious. Brandon would screw something up spectacularly. Victor would have to pay to fix the damage elsewhere, and those customers would eventually find their way to us through word of mouth. It was like Brandon was working as our unpaid marketing department, demonstrating to the entire community exactly why they should choose us over his amateur operation. It was the best advertising money never bought. The final breaking point came when Brandon managed to destroy a customer's engine through sheer mind-boggling incompetence. A regular customer brought in his pickup truck for what should have been a simple oil change. Literally the most basic service any automotive shop provides. Brandon, trying to show initiative and add value, decided to also check the transmission fluid without being asked. This would have been fine if he had any idea what he was doing. Somehow, and I still don't understand the physics of how this is even possible, Brandon managed to drain the transmission fluid and refill the transmission with motor oil instead. The customer made it exactly 3 blocks from the shop before the transmission seized completely and died. Victor had to buy the guy a completely new truck to replace the one Brandon had destroyed. The cost was astronomical. That night, I got 3 separate phone calls that painted a picture of Victor's complete desperation. The first call was from Vincent, who'd heard about the transmission incident and couldn't stop laughing long enough to get the words out. "Your brother just cost your father about 18 grand, Vincent wheezed between fits of laughter. The customer's talking about suing for the difference between what his truck was worth and what he still owes on the loan. The second call was from Martinez, who'd heard the same story through the local business community and wanted to make absolutely sure all his fleet vehicles were scheduled well in advance with us. "Dylan, I've got 23 trucks that keep my business running," Martinez said seriously. "I can't afford to have even one of them destroyed by someone who doesn't know transmission fluid from motor oil." The third call was from Victor himself. When I saw his name on the caller ID, I almost didn't answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Dylan, we need to talk," Victor said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and defeat. "I'm listening," I replied. "Brandon made a mistake today. A big one," Victor admitted. "I heard about it," I said. "I can't keep covering for him," Victor continued, his voice breaking slightly. "The insurance company is threatening to drop us completely. We've lost most of our customers. I don't know what to do anymore." For just a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You could fire Brandon and try to rebuild," I suggested, knowing exactly what his response would be. "He's family, Dylan. I can't just throw him out," Victor said, using the same family loyalty excuse that somehow never applied to me. "So was I, Victor." "That didn't stop you," I replied coldly. I hung up and went back to my drink, feeling absolutely no sympathy for his situation. Brandon was family, but somehow that only mattered when it was convenient for Victor. When it came to choosing between his sons, he'd picked the one with the degree over the one with the experience and dedication. Now he was living with that choice, and it was destroying everything he'd built over 25 years. Good. Some lessons are expensive, and Victor was getting exactly what he deserved. 8 months after I walked out of Victor's shop, it had become a hollowed-out shell of what it used to be. I wasn't even getting regular updates from Tyler anymore, because the collapse was so complete and obvious that everyone in town knew what was happening. Victor's shop had become a cautionary tale that other business owners told each other. My shop, meanwhile, was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. We'd expanded to 10 service bays, hired 8 skilled mechanics, and were seriously considering opening a second location across town to handle the overflow demand. Our customer base had grown so large that we'd had to implement a sophisticated appointment system just to manage the workflow efficiently. But the real satisfaction came from watching Victor's growing desperation as his options dwindled. Vincent had become my unofficial intelligence source, partly because he genuinely enjoyed watching his brother fail, but mostly because Victor kept calling him begging for loans to keep the business afloat. "Your Victor called again last week," Vincent told me over drinks one Friday evening. "Needs 28 grand this time. Says Brandon's got a business plan to turn things around." "What kind of business plan?" I asked, genuinely curious about what new disaster Brandon was cooking up. "Something about partnering with a chain of quick lube places," Vincent replied with obvious amusement. "Brandon thinks they can rebrand as an automotive service center instead of a repair shop." I nearly choked on my drink. The idea of Brandon running a quick lube operation was terrifying. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "Same thing I always tell him," Vincent said with satisfaction. "Fire Brandon and we'll talk business." And he said, "Brandon just needs more time to implement his vision," Vincent continued, shaking his head. "His vision, like destroying a family business, is some kind of artistic expression. Brandon's vision, as it turned out, was to destroy what little remained of their reputation in the most spectacular way possible. The Quick Lube partnership was exactly as disastrous as anyone with half a brain would have expected. He had convinced some franchise owner that Victor's shop could handle overflow work from their 3 locations around town. The idea was that simple oil changes would keep the service bays busy while they rebuilt their repair business and restored customer confidence. What actually happened was that Brandon managed to drain the wrong fluid from 6 different cars in his first week as a quick lube specialist. He drained the brake fluid from a Toyota and tried to refill it with motor oil. The customer noticed the brake pedal going straight to the floor before she even left the parking lot. She had to have the car towed immediately for emergency brake repair. The incident cost Victor $1,400 in repairs and liability, plus the quick lube place dropped their contract immediately. That same week, Brandon managed to strip the oil drain plug on a brand new BMW, cross-thread the oil filter on a Mercedes, and somehow put diesel motor oil in a gasoline engine. Victor was now personally liable for thousands of dollars in additional damage claims. The State Business Bureau had opened a formal investigation into their practices, and their liability insurance had been canceled entirely. No insurance company wanted to cover a shop where the manager was creating safety hazards on a daily basis. But the final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected source: the State Automotive Licensing Board. Apparently, someone had filed a formal complaint claiming that Victor's shop was allowing unlicensed personnel to perform safety-critical repairs without proper oversight. Since Brandon had never bothered to get his automotive technician certification, figuring his business degree was sufficient qualification, this complaint was technically accurate. The state sent an inspector who found extensive evidence of substandard work, improper procedures, and what the official report diplomatically called systemic incompetence in safety-critical systems. They got shut down immediately pending a full investigation. Maya heard about this development from a friend who worked at the courthouse. "They've got a cease and desist order posted on the front door," she told me with obvious satisfaction. "No customers, no work, no revenue until they can prove compliance with state licensing requirements." That evening, I was in my office doing paperwork and reviewing our quarterly financial reports when Tyler knocked on the door. "You've got a visitor," he said, stepping aside to reveal Victor standing in my doorway. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 8 months. His face was gaunt, his clothes looked rumpled, and his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Hello, Dylan," he said quietly. "Victor," I replied, not bothering to get up from my desk. He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk and just stared at his hands for a long moment, as if gathering the courage to speak. "They shut us down," he finally said. "I heard," I replied simply. 25 years, Victor continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I built that place from nothing, and now it's gone." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? He'd made his choices. "Brandon's talking about bankruptcy," Victor said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "Says we should just walk away, start over somewhere else with a clean slate." He stared at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted, clearly hoping I would offer some solution or lifeline. "I think I made the biggest mistake of my life," he admitted. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something that might have been sympathy. This was my father, the man who had taught me to drive, who had shown me how to change my first oil filter, who had once been genuinely proud of the business he'd built from scratch. But then I remembered 12 years of promises. 12 years of, "This will be yours someday." 12 years of believing I was building something for my future, only to have it handed to someone else the moment it actually mattered. "Yeah, Victor, you did," I said simply. He sat there for another minute, maybe hoping I'd offer to help. Maybe hoping I'd suggest some way to fix what Brandon had broken. Maybe hoping I'd extend some kind of olive branch that would magically restore what we'd once had. But I didn't offer anything because some mistakes are too big to fix. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can never be repaired. Finally, he stood up slowly and walked toward the door. Just before he left, he turned back one last time. "I'm proud of what you've built here, Dylan," he said quietly. "Your mother would be proud too." And then he was gone. I sat in my office for another minute, processing what had just happened, then got back to work. Tomorrow was going to be busy, and I had a successful business to run. 2 weeks after Victor's pathetic visit to my office, I got the call I'd been expecting for months. It was Brandon, and he sounded like a man who'd finally realized he was drowning in water that was way over his head. "Dylan, we need to talk," Brandon said, his usual arrogance replaced with something that sounded almost like desperation. "I'm listening," I replied, curious to hear what he had to say. "Can you meet me and Victor at the shop? We've got a proposition for you," Brandon continued. After 8 months of watching them systematically destroy everything Victor had built, after all the lawsuits and insurance cancellations and state investigations, now they had a proposition for me. The irony was almost too perfect. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. I called Tyler and Vincent immediately. If this was going to be the final conversation, I wanted witnesses to whatever desperate bullshit they were about to propose. We pulled up to the shop to find Victor and Brandon waiting in the parking lot. The state's cease and desist order was still taped prominently to the front door, and the whole place had that abandoned, defeated look of a business that was already dead. Victor looked even worse than he had 2 weeks ago during his visit to my office. Brandon, on the other hand, was still trying to maintain some shred of dignity despite the circumstances. He was still wearing his business casual polo shirt, still carrying himself like he thought he was in charge of something important. "Dylan," Victor started, "thanks for coming. We appreciate you taking the time." "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. Brandon stepped forward, and I could see he'd prepared some kind of formal presentation. He had that look people get when they've rehearsed a speech in the mirror. "Look, Dylan, we all know there have been some operational challenges over the past few months," Brandon began. Operational challenges. Even now, with his family's business in complete ruins around him, Brandon couldn't admit he'd screwed up monumentally. It was all just operational challenges, like bad weather or a supply chain disruption. "But we think there's an opportunity here for all of us to benefit from a strategic partnership," Brandon continued, sounding like he was pitching investors instead of begging for help. "Here's what we're proposing," Brandon continued, launching into his prepared pitch. "You take over the day-to-day operations. We'll handle the business side of things. Marketing, customer relations, financial planning," he added, as if these were valuable services I couldn't possibly manage on my own. "It'll be like combining the best of both approaches," Brandon said, with renewed confidence. Tyler actually snorted with laughter at this proposal. Vincent just shook his head in disbelief. "What's in it for me?" I asked, genuinely curious about what they thought they could offer. "We'll make you a partner," Brandon replied eagerly. "Equal shares, equal say in all decisions." I looked at Victor, who was nodding eagerly like this was the most brilliant plan ever conceived. "It makes sense, Dylan," Victor said desperately. "You've got the technical expertise. Brandon's got the business background. Together, you could rebuild this place into something even better than it was before." "And what happens to Brandon's current management position?" I asked. "I'll step back into more of a consulting role," Brandon said smoothly. "Focus on strategy and long-term planning while you handle the operational details. Operational details like actually knowing how to fix cars without destroying them." "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly. "After 8 months of Brandon destroying your business, you want me to come back and fix everything while he continues to collect a paycheck for having opinions about shit he doesn't understand?" "It's not like that," Victor protested weakly. "This would be a fresh start for everyone involved. A fresh start with the same people who created this mess in the first place," I pointed out. Brandon's carefully maintained composure was starting to crack around the edges. "Look, Dylan, I know you're upset about how things went down initially, but this isn't just about family anymore," Brandon said, trying to sound reasonable. "This is about salvaging what we can from a difficult situation." "What you can salvage," I corrected him. "Victor, how much money have you lost since Brandon took over?" I asked directly. Victor's face went pale. "Dylan, that's not really relevant to—" "How much, Victor? Because I've been keeping track," I interrupted. "The transmission replacement, the brake job lawsuit, the insurance cancellations, the lost customers, the state fines," I continued, counting them off on my fingers. "What's the total damage from Brandon's leadership?" $64,000, Victor whispered, barely audible. 64 grand in 8 months, I repeated, letting that number hang in the air. I turned to Brandon. "And you want me to help you salvage what's left?" "Mistakes were made," Brandon said defensively. "But that's in the past now. We need to focus on moving forward constructively." "Here's the thing, Brandon," I said with a smile. "My shop did $240,000 in revenue last month alone. We're booked solid for the next month. I've got customers driving from 3 counties away because word got out that we actually know what we're doing." I let that sink in for a moment, watching their faces as the reality hit them. "So, explain to me why I would want to associate my successful business with your spectacular failure." "Because we're family," Victor said desperately, playing his last card. "Where was that family loyalty when you handed 12 years of my work to someone who doesn't know brake fluid from motor oil?" I shot back. "I made a mistake," Victor admitted, his voice cracking. "Here's my counter proposition," I said, crossing my arms. "You sell me the building, the equipment, and whatever's left of the business for whatever you can get. I'll hire back any of your remaining employees who are actually competent," I continued. "Victor, you can retire like you should have done months ago. And Brandon, you can go find another business to destroy." "You can't be serious," Brandon sputtered, his composure finally cracking completely. "Dead serious. That's the only deal I'm offering," I replied firmly. Victor looked like I'd physically slapped him across the face. We're not looking to sell, Dylan. We're looking to rebuild what we had. With what money? I asked pointedly. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at them one more time. I wanted to make sure they understood exactly how this was going to end. You know what the funny thing is? I spent 12 years building this business for you, Victor, I said, my voice calm but cutting. I could have gone to college, could have gotten a degree, could have had a dozen different careers, I continued. But I chose to stay here because I believed in what we were building together. And the moment you had to choose between your sons, you picked the one with the piece of paper over the one who actually knew how to do the job. Victor was crying now, silent tears streaming down his weathered face. So here's how this ends, I said with finality. Brandon destroyed your business. I built my own. You chose him, and now you get to live with that choice for the rest of your life. Tyler, Vincent, and I got in our trucks and drove away, leaving Victor and Brandon standing alone in the parking lot of their dead business. In my rearview mirror, I could see them still standing there, two men who had lost everything through their own arrogance and stupidity. 1 week later, my phone buzzed with a text message from Vincent that made me smile. Auction tomorrow. Your Victor's shop sold to that tire chain for $35K. Bankruptcy papers filed this morning. I turned my phone off and got back to reviewing our quarterly reports. 2 locations, 22 employees, and growing every month. Not bad for an assistant.